Okay, back here for the 7th round. After I took Colston, the next picks were Lamar Miller, Pierre Garcon, Jay Cutler, Vernon Davis, Ryan Matthews, and Gio Bernard. I like the Gio Bernard pick. 7th round seems like a pretty good value for him. Sam Bradford was just selected. And this is what I was talking about with the quarterbacks. At this point, if you still need a QB2, you kind of just have to jump on the guy that you want. Now, Sam Bradford is not that player for me in most cases. I am not a huge fan of him. But looking at the other quarterbacks available, Andy Dalton, Roethlisberger, Flacco, Tannehill, Freeman, none of these guys really offer elite talent relative to some of the guys who went earlier in the draft. So managing bye weeks becomes a little bit more important. And I don't know. Bradford, not a guy I would have selected there. Antonio Brown was just selected. I am looking to fill my flex spot here before I fill my wide receiver, my third wide receiver spot. McFadden is still around, and there are 2 picks coming up here. Tony Gonzalez and Vereen were taken, so it's back to me. Now, I could take McFadden, I could take Le'Veon Bell. Jason Witten is available in this spot. I understand that McFadden has some words, but I mean, really, the 7th round, like, that seems like pretty good value. The wide receiver I would take in this spot if I had a pick would probably be Eric Decker. He's the best guy available, I think, of this group here. I mean, Hilton is also very appealing. But again, wide receiver is so deep that I feel much more incentivized to take a running back at this point, and that running back is going to be Darren McFadden. Who knows if it'll pan out, but in the 7th round, I'm willing to take the risk. So we'll see what happens next. I do like the fact that I am now set up at all my running back spots and quarterback spots. That gives me a lot of freedom now with my subsequent draft picks. Maybe I can take a guy like Witten with my next pick, although he was just selected. I think if I was going to take Witten, that was the time to do it. But again, I'm all for waiting on tight ends in most cases. Eddie Lacy was also just selected. He's a guy who's getting a lot of hype after a nice preseason game. Remember, folks, that preseason should always be taken with a grain of salt. Like, it's nice to see players do well, and that can tell you something about their ability. But remember that they're sometimes playing against inferior opponents, like second stringers, and they're definitely playing against simpler defenses than they're going to see during the regular season. For running backs, it matters a little less, I think. But for quarterbacks that succeed during the season, I think that you need to be wary of overrating quarterback performances in the preseason. After Eddie Lacy, Steve Smith and Mike Wallace were selected. That leaves the wide receivers available at the top of ADP to be Torrey Smith, Eric Decker, Stevie Johnson, James Jones, Greg Jennings, Tavon Austin, Cecil Shorts, who was just selected right after T.Y. Hilton. Those are both nice little value picks, but I'll continue. Deshaun Jackson, Josh Gordon, Kenny Britt, Miles Austin. Deshaun Jackson's an interesting name in the sense that he is, by default, the top wide receiver in Philadelphia now. And he doesn't seem to have that wide receiver 1 clout that some of these other guys do, like Antonio Brown, who might be less talented, in fact, than Deshaun Jackson, but based upon the fact that we've seen him be a little bit more consistent, we're willing to draft him a little bit higher. But a guy like Deshaun Jackson offers value here in the 8th or 9th round, and try not to overlook things like that. Anyway, it's my pick here, and Roethlisberger and Darrell Richardson were just taken. I'm actually looking at running backs again here. I don't mind building some depth, especially because that McFadden pick was a little risky. If I were to take a running back here, it would be Le'Veon Bell. If I want a backup quarterback here, Andy Dalton and Josh Freeman are both appealing, but again, I don't feel the need to jump on that right away, so I'm going to look at wide receivers, and I think Eric Decker's still available, so I'm going to take him. I do think he can reproduce the touchdown numbers he posted last year, and while he probably won't catch as many passes because Wes Welker's in town nowadays, he should be a fine value in that spot. All right, we'll rejoin for the 9th round right now. All All right, we're back a little early for the 9th round here. Since the Decker pick, Le'Veon Bell, Monty Ball, Alex Smith, and James Jones were taken. I came back a little early because, one, I want to talk about Monty Ball. Now, he has talent. He's going to score some goal line touchdowns. These are all things that we can agree on, right? Now, one thing that scares me off of all of the Denver running backs is just the fact that that situation is so nebulous. We don't know which one of those guys is going to be the feature back. Like, it could even be Noshawn Moreno for all we know. And that's going to scare a lot of people away, but that's also going to create value for the dude who does end up becoming the primary back in that offense. If you think it's going to be Ball, if you think it's going to be Hillman, you can draft those guys accordingly. But for the most part now, with the situation being as unclear as it is, I'm staying away in general. Now, Alex Smith, before guys like Dalton and Flacco and Josh Freeman, I can't get behind that. I'm sorry. That pick does not make sense to me. I understand he's got the Andy Reid offense. He's got Dwayne Bowe and Jamal Charles. But come on, people. Let's take the proven commodities over the unknown. And again, it's like the same theory applied from the Denver running back situation to Alex Smith. Like, we just don't know if he's a good quarterback or not. Can he win games and protect the football? Yes. Can he put up great fantasy stats? We haven't seen it yet. So taking him over a guy like Flacco, over a guy like even Carson Palmer, I'm sorry. Like, I just want a guy who I know can air it out a little bit more as my fantasy QB. So after the Alex Smith pick, James Jones, Torrey Smith, Ahmad Bradshaw, Josh Freeman, Miles Austin, and Andy Dalton were taken. There's one pick here before I come up. And it was Chris Ivory. So looking at the QBs still available, there's Flacco, Tannehill, Carson Palmer, Phillip Rivers, and Schaub. Those are all guys I would be fine with having as my backup quarterback. Running backs available, Mendenhall, Law Firm, Andre Brown, Mark Ingram, Vic Ballard. And it's getting dregsy down here. Best wide receivers, Stevie Johnson, Greg Jennings, Tavon Austin, Deshaun Jackson, Josh Gordon. This is all ADP, so I shouldn't say best. I don't mind taking a quarterback in this spot, if only because it gives me a trade chip during the season, and the running back options aren't too thrilling. But I think getting a starting running back like Mendenhall, however unexciting that pick would be, is a pick that's not too bad here to give me some depth in case McFadden is disappointing. So he's where I'm leaning. And that's who I'm going to take. Oh, but it auto-picked me Steven Johnson. I'm going to see if I can get that fixed. This is a mock draft, for what it's worth. All right, so through the magic of the MyFantasyLeague.com mock draft software, I'm going to get my pick changed from Stevie Johnson to Rashard Mendenhall. That's pretty nice for the purposes of mock drafting. I don't know how often it really is going to come up, but compared to something like Yahoo or ESPN, that's a feature that I like. I don't know if Stevie Johnson being back on the board will change either of the picks that happened after I took him. Someone took Greg Jennings and someone else took Deshaun Jackson. I can imagine that someone might have wanted Stevie Johnson over one of those guys, but I think those are both arguable picks. So anyway, I'm going to pause again here, and I'll be back in just a moment for round 10. Okay, we're back here for round 10, and so after the Mendenhall pick and the Jennings and Deshaun Jackson picks did not get changed, Stevie Johnson was selected, and then Carson Palmer, Mark Ingram, and Kyle Rudolph went. We're looking at a spot in the draft where at this point we're only mocking 3 more picks. I still have a tight end spot open and 2 bench spots, but in general, I don't feel motivated to draft a tight end necessarily yet. I might draft one just for the purposes of taking a guy that I like for this mock draft, because I think someone's going to do a write-up for it. And that would be someone like Jordan Cameron or Fred Davis or Dwayne Allen or Robert Hausler. But looking at backup QBs here, I think that's something that I would take at this point in the draft, because you do need 3 in a 2-quarterback league, because you got to cover your bye weeks. If you have a flex, like a QB and then an offensive player position, you can get by with only 2 quarterbacks, knowing that on your QB's bye weeks, you're going to slot in a running back or a wide receiver into those spots. Even in leagues like that, you give up a lot by doing that, just because quarterbacks inherently score more points in today's NFL than most running backs and wide receivers. A guy like Jake Locker is going to routinely put up like 10 to 15 points. And sometimes you can't count on your wide receivers and running backs to do that. Now, the wide receivers still available here are all pretty good. Tavon Austin, Kenny Britt, Mike Williams, Justin Blackman, Anquan Bolden, Lance Moore, DeAndre Hopkins. Like further down, Michael Floyd, Vincent Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, Cordarrelle Patterson, Chris Givens. These are all guys that are worth owning. And because there are so many of them available, I feel in no way motivated to take a wide receiver at this point. So I would only really look at tight ends, running backs, and QBs in this spot. And I'm on the clock here. After Josh Gordon, D'Angelo Williams is taken, I'm just going to take Joe Flacco. He's the highest ranked quarterback that I have available. And, I mean, if he's your QB3, I think you're doing something right, especially considering the fact that I have 3 pretty reliable wide receivers and 2 very good running backs and then 2 decent running backs in McFadden and Mendenhall to kind of occupy my flex. I'll be looking running back or tight end with this next pick. The running back I would want in this spot is Andre Brown, maybe Ronnie Hillman, if only because those are guys who have an inside track to like a certain number of carries per game. Ben Jarvis Green-Ellis is kind of in that boat, but he's not. I think the upside of a player like him is a little less than someone like Andre Brown, who, if David Wilson gets hurt or if David Wilson continues to be awful in pass protection, Andre Brown's going to carve out a larger role, and we've seen him succeed when he gets carries. This is the point of the draft where the running backs you're looking at are mostly the handcuff running backs, and they're your traditional like Ben Tate, Bernard Pierce, Bryce Brown. Like those guys are all ranked right next to each other in ADP because they're all basically the same player. They're all talented, but they're all behind a quote-unquote like better or more veteran running back presence on the team that they're on. But further down, guys like Pierre Thomas have value. LaMichael James. If I had taken Gore earlier in the draft, LaMichael James would be a guy I would want to get my hands on because handcuffing isn't something I normally preach, but when you have a guy who's towards the tail end of his career, especially at running back, something like a guy like Gore could get hurt really at any point, and I wouldn't be surprised. And if he does go down, a guy like LaMichael James or Kendall Hunter, his other platoon mate, could see a huge rise in value.